Okay, so as I said, I wrote that based on a true story book in like that time period, like 2014, 15, 16 time period. And it was, again, another anti-white communist propaganda book. And I'm just, but because I didn't understand my grandpa's teachings, and my grandpa wasn't teaching me. And I thought that if I showed him that I transcended dualistic software, as he said, and that I transcended the ego, then I thought he would teach me again. So I wrote this book and it's all bullshit. But I thought that transcend dualistic software meant be for race mixing, or transcend the ego meant be not care about white people, but just be for race mixing. But again, like I said, I didn't really transcend dualistic software because I just went back to my Jewish default, because my whole life I saw myself as Jewish and I wanted race mixing because I didn't like white people because I thought that they were the biggest threat. So I didn't realize, but I'm thinking, I'm transcending the ego, Grandpa. I'm transcending dualistic software. Look at my book, and it's talking about how I'm so for black people, and I see race as a social construction, and I'm like, haven't I transcended the ego, Grandpa? But my grandpa was like, no, you didn't. My grandpa was like, I'm not going to teach you. I'm still not going to teach you. But he didn't teach me that I hadn't transcended the ego. But my grandpa also didn't know that I was anti-white my whole life. He didn't know that I saw myself as Jewish and I was anti-white. So my grandpa just like, he didn't want to teach me. But I wanted to learn more from him. And if he would have taught me, it would have been helpful. Maybe he would have got me out of my anti-white stance. But another thing that happened, I think it was around this time, I was looking online and I was reading about Dr. Hora, because that was my grandpa's teacher, the founder of metapsychiatry. And I'm looking at an article written by Dr. Hora. And in the article, Dr. Hora talks about, he says because Dr. Hora, he was metapsychiatry is basically Christianity mixed with Buddhism. It's a religious psychotherapy. So it uses like Christianity and stuff. So Dr. Hora said that Paul in the Bible says, the good I would, I do not. That which I would not, I end up doing. Who will save me from this body of death? And that's very true. Like, my whole life, I was anti-white and I wanted to destroy white people, right? But then, and I wanted to save the Jewish people. But then, I think about it like, the communists, maybe, the Jewish people who wanted to destroy the white people. But then you create Nazis in order to save yourself, right? I want to save myself. But then you create Nazis that end up wanting to destroy you. So the good I wanted to save the Jews, but then I actually ended up almost getting the Jews destroyed. You know what I mean? It's like, or, you want to, an example, I can't even think of examples, but like an example would be like, you really want to go to sleep. But because you want to go to sleep so bad, you're so worried about going to sleep, you can't fall asleep. I don't know, but you see what I'm saying? So the good I do not. That which I would not, I end up doing. So, but my grandpa, and Dr. Hora, like I always said, I always thought that Dr. Hora was a white supremacist, and my grandpa was a white supremacist. So my grandpa, the way that he taught me, he'd be like, yeah, the good you would, you do not. That which you would not, you end up doing. So you give welfare. So my grandpa, this is what Dr. Hora's big thing was too. And I always thought they were just Ayn Rand white supremacists. So that their idea is like, you give welfare to people, to the poor. And you do it in order to help the poor. But you actually do not help the poor by giving to them. Because what helps them the most is to get them to get a job. And if you just give them stuff, then they just end up buying drugs, or they end up, using the money in ways that are not beneficial. And like an example that my grandpa told me about that too, when I was younger, was like lottery winners. Like when people win the lottery, my grandpa said when people win the lottery, they haven't served an apprenticeship to money. They haven't earned it. And therefore, most of them end up broke and end up worse off. They just end up getting drugs. They end up worse off than when they started. So I was like, so that's my grandpa's, that was his teaching. But I was like, dude, that's because, in my mind, I'm like, that's because you're just a white supremacist. You don't want to give welfare because you're a white supremacist. That's the way that I saw it, because I saw myself as Jewish and I wanted to give. But the thing was, I was an anti-white. I was a Jewish supremacist. I wanted to destroy the white people. So in my mind, I'm like, yeah, give to the poor, give to the poor, give to the black people, the brown people, open the borders, give to them, give, so we can destroy the white race. That's the way I always was. I always wanted that, But at the same time, I wouldn't say that out loud. In my mind, I'd be like, no, just give because it's nice and don't be white supremacist. But in my mind, but deep down in my core, I really wanted to save the Jews and defeat the white race. So I remember in my Based on True Story book, when I'm trying to get my grandpa to teach me again, I was saying this stuff. Like I was kind of saying how, but I inverted it. So what I did was I used that teaching that Dr. Hora and my grandpa had about, the good I would, I do not. That which I would not, I end up doing. That's what Paul says in the Bible. But I inverted it and I made it anti-Christian. Because again, I couldn't help myself. Seeing myself as Jewish, I wanted to destroy the white race. So, and I saw Christianity as a part of the white race. So I wrote, The good I do not, that which would not end up doing. So I tried to make it an anti-Christian thing. So I was like, an example of this would be like, the Christians who try to convert the Africans. I was like, they try to convert the Africans to Christianity, but Christianity isn't necessarily as good of a religion as the African religions. So I was like, so they try to end up helping the Africans, but they end up actually just hurting the Africans. So again, I couldn't help myself. I had to make it into like anti-white, anti-Christian, right? So I wrote that in my Based on True Story book, and like just other things I wrote in my Based on True Story book. Like I was trying, because at this point, I'll get to this later about the because I didn't understand what my grandpa meant by transcending dualistic software. So like my grandpa would say transcend dualistic software, and like an example of that would be insider outsider software, because insider outsider is based on illusion that there's a self and there's insiders and there's outsiders. But my grandpa, metapsychiatry teaches that everything's an illusion. Now my grandpa says everything is energy, but Dr. Horace said everything's more like a dream. But everything's an illusion, so there is no self. Everything is one. It's all an illusion. So insider and outsider, that's based off the illusion of a self and others. So you want to transcend that. But again, my grandpa would say, but, like the Jews who have their rituals, right? I was anti-religious, so I would have been anti, the rituals, right? But my grandpa would say, actually, they can be helpful to not compromise and to follow your religious points of view, but not with an attitude of insider outsider, because my grandpa would say that would be self-confirmatory, ego-oriented. But you do not eat with Gentiles, not because you see them as inferior necessarily, but because you maintain your rituals, and your rituals, my grandpa would say, helps you to partake in something that takes you outside of yourself and breaks you out of your habits, which are self-confirmatory, in your circumstances, in your reliance on other people, and in your stuff like that, and that can help you to get into the flow, to transcend the self. So in a sense, there would be insider outsider in that sense, but it wouldn't be attitude oriented. It wouldn't be like an emotional putting others down. But regardless, again, I wanted to just be anti-Christian. So I'm like, yeah, Christianity's insider outsider, because, and they have they want to think that they're superior and that they have the right way, but that confirms the self, and that's, ego oriented. And so I was misusing my grandpa's teachings, because I'm misusing my grandpa's teachings and trying to say like, yeah, the Christians, they have superior, inferior software, and they believe they're superior, they're insider, outsider software, and they exclude people, and that's dualistic software, and they should transcend dualistic. So, but really I had a sinister motivation. Really underlying my motivation was I wanted to destroy the white people. So I had the most lowest level of software, according to my grandpa, the predator prey, dualistic impersonal software, where I wanted to destroy Christianity and destroy white people. So I want to be like, yeah, Christianity is based around dualistic software. But meanwhile, I was expressing dualistic software. I wanted to destroy Christianity so that I could destroy white people. And this is the thing too that's interesting is my grandpa would say that, believing that there's, the Christians who believe that Jesus is God and he's the only way. My grandpa say, yes, there is one only way. It's the flow. But my grandpa would say that a lot of Christians are in dualistic software, but a lot of everybody's in dualistic software. My grandpa said there's no formula to transcend dualistic software. But I would use my grandpa's teachings, which were very profound, but I would use them, but then I would also mix in my dualistic software to try to destroy the white people. So my books were extra sinister because they used a lot of good ideas, but they also incorporated my dualistic software to try to destroy the white people. So I was very good at, basically, anybody who read my books probably, was very susceptible to be, getting brainwashed and becoming anti-white Marxist. And that's why I put those books out there, It's complicated, but, I put the book, but like I said, when I put the book out, I wanted my grandpa to read it and my grandpa to be like, oh yeah, this is good. But I didn't realize that I hadn't really transcended dualistic software. I thought that being for race mixing was transcending dualistic software. So, but anyways, my grandpa started teaching me again because I got in an argument with my friend Rohan, and my grandpa started teaching me. But I'll kind of describe what my grandpa started teaching me. This is 2016, 2017, 2018. But this started to kind of move me away from being anti-white again. So I posted my anti-white communist book, trying to use my grandpa's teachings, which are profound. Like one example of my grandpa's teachings was I asked him, what is the meaning of when when Vishnu comes in the form of the fish and then he gets put in progressively larger bowls? And my grandpa's like, well, that means that could be a metaphor of the transcend, the progressively expanding your awareness toward the flow. stuff like that. So I would put that stuff in my book, but I would also incorporate my anti-white stuff. And, like I said, I liked stuff like Hinduism because it was not Christian, and I thought that Christian was white. But at the same time, I didn't like Hinduism because I didn't like any religion. I was a Marxist. I wanted everyone to mix. So, anyways, my grandpa started teaching me again. This is like one example of something my grandpa taught me. I asked my grandpa, what do you think of the idea of soulmates? And my grandpa was like, well, it could be based around, reincarnation. Reincarnation could be, my grandpa says he doesn't believe anything, but he has insights. He tries not to memorize anything. It's only insights or inspiration. And at that moment, this isn't something that he would say that, is a formula or something that's like concrete. That's true. Like he wouldn't necessarily say he believes in reincarnation, but he would say that it's possible. It's based off reincarnation. And I remember like when I believed in evolution, Darwinian evolution, I liked it because it was anti-religion, and I didn't like my grandpa's kind of belief in, because my grandpa said that he didn't really necessarily believe in evolution. He thought that reincarnation explained a lot of people's personality. Like I thought that personality would be based around a lot around genetics and evolution and stuff. And my grandpa said a lot of it's maybe based around reincarnations. But I didn't like that because, like I said, I didn't like the idea of reincarnation because I thought it was white supremacist. Because I thought, like in Hinduism, they would say, yeah, I'm rich right now because I am, based off the merits of my last life. So it maintains the status quo. So it justifies it. So you say, oh yeah, I'm rich and I'm successful because of my past lives. I merited this. Or victim blaming. Oh, and you're also poor and you're not successful because in past lives, you've merited this. So I didn't like that idea. But my grandpa would even admit, my grandpa would say, yeah, well, that would be expression of dualistic software if you have that attitudinal, emotional reaction to others based in that way. But regardless, I didn't like the idea of reincarnation. I didn't like anything that was spiritual because I always saw spirituality as white supremacist. Okay? So my grandpa's teaching me more, and then I'm listening, I'm learning, and then so I get a Chabad book, and I'm reading the Chabad book to my grandpa, and one of the things it says in the Chabad book, like I said, it said something about there was in Babylon, or actually this was an interpretation by Aish. It's another Jewish group. It's an Orthodox Jewish group. So the Orthodox Jews tend to be more Nazi. They tend to be more nationalist and not communist. So they were anti-communist. So what their interpretation of the Tower of Babel was, they were saying that in Babylonia, they tried to make everybody mix and they tried to make everybody speak one language. But they were saying that that's not good. And it's good to allow diversity and allow people to maintain their groups and have their different languages. Like, so it's more nationalistic idea. Like making everybody mix isn't diversity. What's good is allow there to be an Ireland, allow there to be a Britain, allow there to be in Africa, in Nigeria, or, all these different places, to allow diversity. So I was like, but I didn't like that. I'm like, Grandpa, yeah, the Orthodox Jews, they're white supremacists. They're Nazis. I don't like that. I wanted everybody to mix. I wanted race mixing. But my grandpa was like, so I was like, you see, they're not transcending dualistic software, Grandpa. Like, that's what I thought. I'm like, look, they haven't see, the Orthodox Jews are just white supremacists. They haven't transcended the ego. That's the way that I thought. So this is why it's good that my grandpa started teaching me again, because he just left me confused. So then my grandpa was like, no, Ryan. Well, he didn't say it like, he was just like, well, I was like, what do you think about this, Grandpa? And he was like, well, their interpretation is very interesting. My grandpa said, because, forcing people to mix isn't necessarily the flow. And I was like, what? Because I was like, because I always thought that the flow was like a hippie, everybody should mix, transcend the ego, everybody should mix. But then my grandpa's like, no, you can't force oneness. My grandpa said the flow is oneness. But if you force oneness, that's not the flow. And in the flow, my grandpa said there's different body parts. There's the thumb, there's the eyes, there's the tongue, there's the nose, there's the brain cells, there's the heart cells. Not everything is the same. My grandpa told me everything is one, but not everything's the same. Everything is Ryan, but it doesn't mean that everything in Ryan is the same. Like your heart cell says, yes, I am Ryan. And the brain cell says, yes, I am Ryan. Yeah, they are all one. They're all part of Ryan, but they're not all the same. So I was like, okay. So my grandpa so I was like, I was wrong. I thought that my grandpa was teaching me race mixing is good and everybody should mix, and globalism. That's what I thought that my grandpa taught. Transcend the ego. Again, I didn't understand my grandpa's teachings, but now I'm starting. So I was like, okay, so everything is one, but not everything is the same. Not everything is equal, but everything is one. And my grandpa's like, yes. So when you're in the flow, you recognize everything is one, but not everything's the same. So you would acknowledge differences. And if you're in the flow, you don't try to force everything to be, a melting pot, quote unquote, right? Necessarily. So I was like, okay, so this started to break me out of the Marxist, communist, my Jewish ways, wanting everybody to mix, especially the white people. And I started to be like, okay, so maybe, my grandpa's teachings are not that. So it took me out of my default that I was my whole life of wanting race mixing. So I was like, okay. And then my grandpa started teaching me more stuff. So I'm learning from my grandpa different things like one example too was like, I was reading the Chabad book, and there's this teaching about the Babylonians. I think it was the Babylonians. They conquered all these lands, and they put up these statues, these idols. And the idols, they wrote the name of the Tetragrammaton on the idols so the idols could speak. So even though the idols were made up of all these different like metals and stuff, and they were kind of crappy, they could still speak because they had the name of the Tetragrammaton written on them. And I was like, what does this mean, Grandpa? And my grandpa said, what I think it means is that, even in imperialism, there's a higher aspiration. In colonialism, there's a higher aspiration. They try to make everybody one, and there's a higher aspiration in that. That's a desire for the flow, but even though it's not necessarily the flow, there's a higher aspiration, which is the flow. And my grandpa said, and the reason why the idols could speak is because there's a higher aspiration. But again, like I said, I would always be like, my grandpa's just just a white supremacist. He's trying to justify colonialism and say that behind colonialism there was a higher aspiration of bringing everybody together so that everybody could recognize that there is one truth, that there is one flow. But when I was a communist, I didn't want that. I wanted everybody to mix, but I didn't want to justify colonialism. Because my grandpa, like I said, I asked my grandpa about Christianity, and my grandpa was like, yeah, the higher aspiration of the conquistadors trying to make all the Aztecs and stuff Christians and make all the different groups Christian is the acknowledgement that there is one truth, that there is one flow. But again, I didn't understand what my grandpa meant by the flow. I always thought it was a hippie thing, like, oh, meditation, like the flow. Like, I thought it was just some hippie race mixing thing. But there is one truth. So, and it takes people out of their parochialism so that, and it can move people toward that awareness that there is one truth, that there is one flow. So, but my grandpa's teaching me this stuff. So that's kind of justifying colonialism a little bit. And that's kind of justifying not wanting race mixing because not everything is the same. So my grandpa started moving me a little bit more toward the right wing again. And I started to become more of a Nazi again. So I'm like, okay, for a while I went back to being a communist Marxist wanting race mixing. But then my grandpa broke me out of that. And now he's teaching me more of a Nazi orientation of not race mixing and that race mixing isn't necessarily the flow. So I kind of moved again, this is like a 2019 time, toward being more of a right winger again. And I'll get to what happens next. But yeah, I'll get to what happens next.